What's going on, y'all? This is Brett with Montana Knife Company, and today we're going to be going over how you can be more prepared for spring bear hunting. So, why spring bear hunting? This is a multifaceted answer for this question. The first and foremost for me is that after a long winter, especially out here in Montana, it's cold. The winter can go on. I mean, you start really getting into that gray weather from October all the way, some years even into May. So it's a good way to get out on the mountain, after being stuck inside for the whole winter season. I mean, some could even say that we're coming out of hibernation ourselves. It's a good way to get out there, get prepared for the rest of your hunting season as far as like getting back into mountain shape. And it's also a good way to keep tabs on the animals that you're going to be getting after later in the season. You can kind of get out there and see what the deer and elk populations are looking like and kind of keep tabs on them, especially as you're getting later into the spring bear season. That late May, for some states, it's early June that you could still be hunting spring bears. And so at that time, you can start seeing, the bull elk, they're starting to get their antler growth, and you can keep an eye on the mule deer herds as well. But another really important reason for hunting bears in the spring in particular is because the deer and the elk, they are having their fawns and their calves in the springtime. And bears they can be pretty detrimental to the ungulate population. They are targeting these deer fawns and the elk calves as a food source. And so doing your part in predator management is also helping those deer and elk populations out there. On top of that, male bears the boars will cannibalize cubs. So they will chase down sows and they will kill these little cubs so that they can rebreed the sows. It causes the sows to go back into heat. So by getting out there in the spring and targeting mature boars, you are actually helping the bear population by keeping the sows and especially keeping the cubs out there on the landscape. Springtime in the mountains can be absolutely beautiful. And like I said, it's a really fun time to get out there and start seeing, all the green coming up and keeping an eye on animals. Maybe you're shed hunting, maybe you're turkey hunting, morel hunting, at the same time, whatever it may be. But if you're out there spring bear hunting, and especially if you're doing any kind of backcountry hunting or overnight trips, the weather in the spring, and especially in the mountains, can be severely temperamental. I have been on trips where in the middle of the day it was 65 or 70 degrees, I'm hunting in a t-shirt and it's beautiful, and then 3 hours later the temperature has dropped down to 40 or 35, and you're starting to get some snow and sleet, cloud cover, or just straight up rain. So I recommend having the proper clothing to be prepared for that. I mean, you're really going to want something like a puffy jacket for glassing, in those frigid temps if it does change. Gloves are a huge help, so that you can maintain, your dexterity in your hands and your fingers. Rain gear is a huge one. I never take my rain gear out of my pack, or my puffy for that matter, or my gloves. Maybe packing a beanie. Instead of wearing a hat like this one, that way you can switch, keep your ears warm. Also, I do recommend having fire starters and multiple ways to start a fire, and then also a medical kit, which are two things that don't leave my pack year round anyway. On top of that, I would highly recommend getting a GPS locator like Garmin. The inReach is probably the most popular one. There's other companies in recent years that have come out with similar products like the Zoleo device. If you haven't heard of it, I'm sure there's some other ones out there. And then lastly, I always recommend telling somebody where you're going, when you're headed in there, and when you're planning on coming out. And that's regardless of whether you're going into your hunting area with someone or not. And having a GPS locator in case of emergency, you could be out there and you could break your leg, you could get a flat tire, you could flip your truck. Anything can happen out there. And somebody told me a long time ago that the mountains do not care about you. So these bears, they love to live way deep into the mountains, and if you're chasing them in there, it helps a ton to give yourself the best chance of survival if you're going to go chase Bruins. So another thing that I recommend for folks to get prepared for their spring bear season is being in the proper physical shape. So bears, they do tend to live in some pretty steep country. I mean, I don't think that I have ever been on a spring bear hunt that was not in some pretty rugged, tough stuff, that we were hunting them in. And so being in the correct physical shape is going to help a ton. It's going to help you be able to go farther. It's going to be able to help you stay longer, especially if you're coming from a state that does not have mountains. Let's say you're coming from Florida, for instance. I mean, you were living at sea level year round, and then you're coming to a place where the base elevation, even in town, can be 1,300 or 1,700 feet. And you could be getting as high as, 6,000 feet or maybe more in some cases to spring bear hunt. So that elevation change, it takes some time to acclimate to that climate. It can burn your lungs up a lot faster. You're putting a lot of pressure on your legs, especially like your quads and your calves, even your ankles while you're side hilling, or just going up some of that steep stuff. So you're gonna want to have like the proper footwear for that as well. I recommend at least an 8-inch boot. Should you get into any snow, you're gonna get a little bit more ankle support that way. But nothing is going to replace being in better physical shape. These bears, I mean, I've been on bear hunts where I've gone 6 miles in and then shot a bear and then had to get 6 miles out going up and down steep faces. And so to be able to have that stamina, that lung capacity, and just trying to build that muscle however you can, especially when you have weight on your back in your pack, which is another good point, is having the proper pack. It goes a long way for sitting on your hips. The way it rests on your shoulders and the way that it carries on your lower back can make a difference. I've used packs in the past that have hurt my shoulders or have really not sat correct on my hips, even when they were properly adjusted. And so having the right gear for that, as well as being in physical shape, is going to go a very long way and will help you, again, stay out there longer and be able to go farther when chasing bears. And then lastly, as far as having the correct gear and being in the correct physical shape, no matter how good of shape you're in, I still recommend keeping trekking poles out there. I didn't use them for years. And the first time that I ever did use them packing out an animal, I could not believe I hadn't been using them prior. It makes it a lot easier, and it's a good tool to have if you do end up hurting yourself, but you think you can get out. If you might have twisted your knee or your ankle, you can use that trekking pole for that added stability to get out of there. You can use them to help stand yourself up if you're hunting by yourself and you were fortunate enough to harvest a bear. You can use those trekking poles to push yourself up when you have weight in your pack, especially on some of that steep country. And then also for certain shelter systems, if you are staying overnight, you can actually use your trekking pole to, like a teepee, for instance. Most teepees do have a pole in the center, and some of them do, they can use a trekking pole in place of a pole that does come with the teepee. So it's another thing that I recommend having. Nowadays you can get them in carbon fiber or aluminum, or a carbon fiber aluminum combo. Just for the added stability on top of being lightweight, but either way, they are worth their weight in packing them in. So as far as finding where the bears are and continuing to prep for your spring bear hunt, there's some different ways that you can do this, but to find where they're hanging out at, first of all, generally speaking, they do live in pretty steep country. And pretty big country at that, especially if you're hunting like here in western Montana or like northern Idaho. Maybe you're down in the Frank Church Wilderness down in lower central Idaho. There's a lot of ground to cover. And so pre-scouting and e-scouting are two things that can make a huge difference in whether you're successful in your hunt or not. Pre-scouting, if you are fortunate enough to live, like where we do here in western Montana, where we can drive, 30 minutes up the road and be in national forest, getting out there and just kind of getting eyes on what's going on can make a big difference, right? If the snowpack is not too horrible and you have that accessibility to get in there, I would go in as early as, the first or second week of April just to see if you see any bears moving around. Now, that is pretty early. Like here in Montana, the season doesn't even open until the 15th. Typically, I'm not even hunting them until sometime in May anyway. With that said, I have gone out and seen bears, in mid-April, somewhere around that time frame, even if I wasn't planning on hunting, until later in May or something like that. Maybe you're glassing a bear that's a mile and a half away and you're not going to be able to get there because of the snowpack. So pre-scouting makes a big difference, but then also e-scouting. So it's 2024. There's a lot of different companies out there that can help you, a lot different apps in doing your e-scouting. Onyx is probably the most popular one. It's one that I personally use. And with Onyx maps, you can drop waypoints, that if you want to check them out later on the map. You can see what land is national forest or wilderness area or private property or BLM land. It'll show you who owns what land to give you a better idea of what you can hunt. So you can track with it. You can drop waypoints. You can put on map layers to see where historical fires have been. It's an incredibly useful tool, and it's a way for you to get eyes out there without actually having to go out there. And so highly recommend it. And if you want to go a step further, for instance, like my friend Mark Livesey, he actually came up with a program through his company, Treeline Pursuits, that takes a lot of this data from all over. We're talking Google Maps, Google Earth, Onyx, and so many of these other companies, and he puts all of this data together to truly give you the most information that you can about an area. And so Onyx has map layers where you can put on a historical fire. Well, if I'm not mistaken, they only go back to 2015. The Forest Service has maps that have fires all the way back to, like the early 2000s, right? Which can make a difference. I've personally showed up to an area, something looked good on the map. I saw that it was a burn, and then I got in there and it had already been overgrown, right? So having the most information you can for e-scouting is going to save you time whenever you get out there. And really it'll help you plan your hunt better as far as finding, what drainages are the furthest away from roads even, or which roads are gated that you want to start your hunt on before you kind of push back further into that country. So pre-scouting, e-scouting, two things that I highly recommend for preparing for your spring bear hunt, especially if you do not live in an area or a state that does hold bears. There's a lot of different states that do offer spring bear hunting. Some of these states even offer spring and fall seasons or different styles of hunting. So depending on what you're looking for, you can spot and stalk, you can hunt with hounds, you can hunt over bait. Here in Montana, we actually recently opened hound hunting in certain regions, although we don't have a baiting season. You can't bait for bears here versus like in Idaho, you can. Right here, we only have one bear tag allotted for residents or non-residents versus states like Idaho. You can get 2 tags in the spring. So I highly recommend doing your research. Each state has different things that they offer and at different price points as well. Idaho has some of the cheaper tags. Montana, Wyoming, you're kind of getting in that $350, $375 for a tag. So I would really recommend doing your research. And companies like Go Hunt, they actually have whole guidelines that you can look up to be able to help you with your search so that you can plan your hunt accordingly. So there's a lot of misinformation out there when it comes to bears, right? And they are dangerous creatures. But typically black bears, if they see you, they're gonna probably run away from you. However, if you are hunting in a state like Wyoming, Idaho, here in Montana, especially western Montana, there are grizzly bears around, and grizzly bears are to be taken seriously. They are typically more aggressive, they're more protective, less likely to run away from you. So when you're hunting out there, you want to make sure that you're being safe, just being attentive to your surroundings, knowing, if you can, finding information on whether there has been any grizzlies in the area that you're hunting. But also, if you do happen to get a bear down, try to get it field dressed and deboned or whatever you're going to do. Try to do that as quick as possible. That's not only to save the quality of your meat, but also once the scent of that fresh flesh gets into the air, the smell of blood gets into the air, it might be traveling downwind to a canyon. If there's a grizzly bear down there, he is going to swing right around and be coming straight for whatever he's smelling. And so they're very aggressive, very food protective. So just make sure that you're being safe. I always carry a sidearm with me along with my rifle. Even at camp, making sure that your food is put away properly, or if you have gotten a bear, you might even want to hang the quarters up in a tree, or if you are back camping at the truck, make sure that you do have a cooler that you can put a lock on to put that bear meat or just your regular camp food in there. Pretty much any way that you can deter a bear from wanting to come to you. And then on top of that, if it does happen, even if you make a good shot on a bear, they are incredibly tough creatures. And I have made good shots on bears where they eventually would have expired, but I got onto them too fast and I ended up getting charged and had to shoot again in close quarters, which is no fun. So I would highly recommend, if you were not sure of your shot, to wait until you go after that bear. And so if you shoot one in the evening and you're at last light and you're not sure of your shot, honestly, I would wait until the morning to go back and start looking for blood. And you can use one of those mapping systems like Onyx to mark where you shot, and you can look and see what escape routes you think it might have taken. So when spring bear hunting and fall bear hunting for that matter, I've had the best luck finding bears in steep country. And with that, I've found that they tend to like, big drainages, especially like rocky or cliffy country, which can vary. It can be heavily timbered or it can be fairly open. Like if you're down closer to central Idaho, hunting in like the Frank Church Wilderness, for instance. With that said, the number one thing that I'm looking for is water. Bears are pretty hot creatures. They have that thick fur, they got a thick layer of fat, especially in the fall when they've been gorging themselves on berries. But even last spring when I was spring bear hunting here in Montana in May, it had already gotten up to 85 degrees. So I wasn't seeing them quite roaming around in the open like I normally would. So where I did find bears last year was near water sources, whether that be a creek bottom, whether it be a wallow like an elk would use. I would definitely pinpoint those kinds of areas. Also, typically speaking, whenever you are getting down into a creek bottom with running water, the brush is thick. You got a lot of tall creek brush down there. Bears like to hang out down there to stay cool and to stay hidden. On top of that, I would say that I wouldn't overlook burns. I've had good luck finding bears in burns. The bear I shot last year actually was in a burn. There's a lot of different terrain that they can cover, looking for tree lines, even clear cuts. You can also walk logging roads. I've found that when walking logging roads, particularly ones that are gated, some of that spring grass tends to grow a lot thicker on those sides of the road, and bears are kind of lazy too, so they'll actually just use those roads to travel if they're undisturbed. And so whenever you're looking on those logging roads and looking for that grass, that does bring me to my next point. Bears are food-driven creatures through and through. Those spring grasses, when they're coming out of the den, is the number one target. I mean, they're going after glacier lilies, or what some people call avalanche lilies. You can get into an area, and if you're seeing a bunch of stumps or logs that have big chunks torn out of them, or they're torn apart, and you're seeing that white pulpy wood underneath, that's a pretty good indicator that a bear has been in there looking for grubs, or looking for larvae, termites, ants, whatever it may be. They'll flip rocks for the same thing and dig in those rock holes. So if you're finding sign like that, there's a good chance that there's a bear in the area. On top of that, if you are getting into, herds of mule deer or elk, I would also not overlook the possibility of a bear being around that is, could be looking for deer fawns or elk calves. They're highly, highly, highly food driven, and there's a saying for both the spring and the fall that if you find the food, you find the bears. Lastly, if you were hunting bears in big mountainous country like we have here out west, having the proper glass goes a long way. I mean, whether you were just bringing binos or whether you were using a spotting scope, some of these bears, you're not seeing them unless they're, 3/4 of a mile away sometimes. And so it helps a ton to have high quality glass to be able to make sure that you know what you were looking at. You could save yourself a lot of trouble by being able to tell the difference whether it's a mature bear or not. If you are not behind the glass, you can also use methods like predator calling. Like I said, walking logging roads, and really, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can go about it. For some states, you can also bait. You can run hounds. However you get after it, you want to make sure that you are giving yourself the best chances to get out there and be successful, especially if you're coming from out of state or you're taking a long, dedicated time period to go out and hunt bears. There's a lot of ways to do it. And if even watching videos like this or reading blogs. So with that said, I do wish everybody out there the best of luck. Spring bear season is just around the corner, and don't forget to tag us in your photos if you're happening to use our knives, and wishing everybody the best of luck out there.